Hey, BreakThru students, Pastor Joe here, and I am really bummed I wasn't able to be with you last night. I was not feeling good yesterday, and so needed the day to rest and recover. But I wanted to bring you up to speed on where we're at in our Free People series. We're walking through this kind of mini series as we look at the book of James, and I thought this would be a really good series for us coming out of Easter, coming out of just celebrating the resurrection of Jesus and what does it mean to live as people of the resurrection, as students of the resurrection. And James is a great book. It's a shorter book, but it's full of a lot of wisdom. James, many believe, was Jesus's brother, and so we have some of that personal connection there as James writes. But he does a lot of good in just helping us to to understand what it means to live as Christians, to live as people of the resurrection today. And so 2 weeks ago, in our first week of this Free People series, we were in James chapter 1, verses 22 to 25. And it's going to read through the verses real quick for you there. James writes that you must be doers of the word. We must be doers of the word, and not only hearers who mislead themselves. Those who hear but don't do the word are like those who look at their faces in a mirror. They look at themselves, walk away, and immediately forget what they were like. Have you ever done that before? Looked in the mirror, then had to do a double take, and then maybe come back just to make sure everything was right? James says that's what it's like if we just kind of hear the word, but we're not actually doing the word. He continues and said, but there are those who study the perfect law, the law of freedom, and continue to do it. They don't listen and then forget, but they put it into practice into their lives. They will be blessed in whatever they do. And so James is saying it's great. We should be reading Scripture. We should be hearing Scripture preached. But if that's where we leave it, that's not what it means. We need to be putting this into practice. What does it mean to love one another? What does it mean to love our neighbor? What does it mean to pray for our enemies, to love our enemies? What does it mean to show grace and mercy? Just a couple of verses later, James says that the true religion is this, that those who care for and love the widows and the orphans. And so how are we putting our faith into practice? And so that's what we talked about in week 1. And then last night, if we were going to be together, we are going to be kind of up earlier in James chapter 1, looking at verses 5 through 8. And our focus, our emphasis was supposed to be on how do we navigate dangerous situations? How do we navigate sticky situations? Maybe we get ourselves in a spot of trouble. I don't know if you've ever done anything dangerous in your life. As I think about my life, some of the more dangerous activities, I guess, that I've done, just kind of been hiking up and down a mountain that is next to Machu Picchu in Peru, and there wasn't really any guide ropes. You had a little wire cable that was kind of by your knees, but that wasn't going to stop you from the 500-foot cliff right on the other side of that. Or even just when we were at NYC 2019, hiking up and down the Grand Canyon, and just being in awe of the beauty and the vastness, but also the danger that was right there. But there's other dangerous or sticky situations we can find ourselves in. I know all of you have one of these, a phone. And if you don't, you have a tablet, you have a computer, and that opens a portal to a lot of different things. Not everything on there is great, and so how do we navigate those situations when the temptations arise? And James reminds us that we should be seeking God for wisdom. He says in verse 5, he says, "But anyone who needs wisdom should ask God, whose very nature is to give to everyone without a second thought, without keeping score." James says that wisdom will certainly be given to those who ask. So when we find ourselves in those situations, just ask God for wisdom. Whoever asks shouldn't hesitate. They should ask in faith without doubting. Whoever doubts is like the surf of the sea, tossed and turned by the wind. People like that should never imagine that they will receive anything from the Lord. They are double-minded, unstable in all their ways. So James is saying when we doubt and we really doubt that God is who he said he is, it's like we almost have like two different minds going on, that we're just like the waves just crashing and tumbling constantly. There's no stability. There's no grounding. And so when we find ourselves in these situations that are dangerous, that are sticky, um, ask God for wisdom. And so I'm excited to go through this series with you. There's 2 more weeks left in this series, and I think what I appreciate about this series is every week we're coming back to a portion of the gospel where Jesus was asked, "What does it mean to live? What is the greatest commandment in the law?" And so each week through this Free People series comes back to that. We pick up in Matthew chapter 22. It says, when the Pharisees heard that Jesus had left the Sadducees speechless, they met together, and one of them, who was a legal expert, was trying to test Jesus. He said, "Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment." And those Pharisees would have known that from the Old Testament, from Moses' words in Deuteronomy, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But then Jesus kind of ups the ante on them. He says the second is like it. You must love your neighbor as yourself. He says all the law and prophets depend on these two commands. The entirety of the Old Testament and the fulfillment of that through Jesus into the New Testament depends on loving the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, strength, with all our being, with all our mind, and at the same time loving our neighbors as ourselves. And so as we walk through this Free People series, that's going to be our focus. How do we love God with all of ourselves? And how do we love our neighbors, whether they're our neighbors in our homes, our siblings, our parents, our neighbors on our street, our neighbors in the classroom, or our neighbors that are halfway around the world? How do we love them as ourselves? So thanks for tuning in. One last announcement here as we wrap up. Just as the weather's getting warmer and as it's light out later, plan on being at the church every week. We will plan to be at the pavilion unless the weather is not warm or it's raining or windy, and then we'll be in the fellowship hall. So hope you guys are doing great and can't wait to see you next week.